your host, Grayson Brulte. Welcome to another episode of SAE Tomorrow Today, a show about emerging technology and trends in mobility with leaders and innovators who make it all happen. On today's episode, we're absolutely honored to be joined by Laurel Nelson, Staff Sustainability Science Engineer at Rivian Automotive. On today's episode, we'll discuss Laurel's work on SAE J3341, which addresses carbon footprint methodologies for passenger vehicles. We hope you enjoy this episode. Laurel, welcome to the podcast.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me.
It's great to have you here. You're focused on the science of sustainability. You're doing really good things with the J3341 carbon footprint. But before we get into that, everybody has their own sustainability journey. What's your sustainability journey and how did you start it?
Good question. I mean, I think like most people, maybe not most, but a lot of people in this field, my journey really started with a passion for the natural world. Very lucky that I grew up in California, so spent most, if not all, my weekends outside, whether it be backpacking, running, hiking, surfing, just outside as much as possible. And I think that love for the environment really fosters a desire to protect it. I had initially been on this pre-medical chemistry track, and slowly but surely I was more and more interested in my environmental classes. Anything that sort of had to do with the natural world, I was just way more interested in. And then throughout college, as I began to personally witness some of the impacts of climate change, particularly wildfires on the West, this is when it just fully pulled me towards wanting my career to be dedicated to sustainability. So pursued a grad school in civil and environmental engineering and never looked back. But so I think that's a pretty standard when I ask around in the field. We're all like, we love the outdoors, and maybe some of us have witnessed wildfires, and that, take it from there.
But pre-med to sustainability, that's a heck of a maneuver there.
It was a bit of a switch up. Yeah, my family was surprised.
I could imagine that dinner conversation. So today you're in sustainability. You had this great journey from what you've experienced in California with the natural beauty of the outdoors. And now you're working on the J3341 carbon footprint methodologies for passenger vehicle standard. Where does that fit into the journey? What was the next thing that you got there?
Yeah. So I'll zoom in and get in the weeds a little bit. But during grad school, I studied lifecycle assessment. And for those of you who don't know, I don't know if you were going to cover this, but a lifecycle assessment is a methodology that is systematically assessing the environmental impacts of a product or process all the way from, we call it cradle to grave. So you're mining, using your product all the way to disposing at the end of life. Carbon footprint, what we're going to be talking about, is one that's specifically focused on climate change or greenhouse gases. So during my time at Stanford, I was very fortunate. We had this partnership with Rivian, which rewind. I also love cars and I love Rivians. So when I saw that Rivian was one of the companies that had partnered with Stanford for this project, I was like, get me on that team. It worked. I was super aggressive in making sure I wound up on that team, and I got to work on a life cycle assessment with Rivian while I was at grad school. And so that kicked off what eventually led to my job here at Rivian. I'm on our product sustainability team, and we're essentially focused with trying to design and build the most sustainable vehicles possible. And a lot of that means benchmarking other vehicles, making sure we are on the cutting edge of sustainability. So anytime a different OEM releases an LCA report, I'm probably one of the first people to dig in and read it. And one of the things I noticed early on is that we are all doing them differently, like night and day, completely uncomparable final results, which made my job tricky. It was a lot of reverse engineering, trying to figure out what people were doing. But I also was like, man, this completely undermines the credibility. This makes it impossible for people to discuss, especially if you aren't like me and you don't dig in and reverse engineer what they're doing to figure out what they're trying to say. And so that led my whole team, honestly, to be like, we want to fix this. We want to be a part of this discussion and make these reports comparable and really kind of align and push each other to do better in this space. And so that's how we wound up trying to kick off J3341.
Well, you combined your love of the outdoors with a great company, because Rivian, if you look at all the marketing, it's always focused on the outdoors, and you even have remote chargers that you put many blog posts up about. It's interesting when you talk about everybody's doing it differently. You had the voluntary safety assessments on the autonomy side where everybody was doing them differently, and they finally came together with government help. Is that one of the things with the task force with J3341 where I'll use the term loosely standard, but to kind of where everybody can come to the same page, the same table to kind of really dissect what each other's doing to move things forward?
I think so. I mean, we've been super fortunate that the task force has a really broad representation. We have a lot of OEMs in there. We got some government researchers, we got academia, we have tier one suppliers. So we definitely have this great cut of cross-functional collaborators. And so far, we honestly have been aligning on a lot of issues. I will say we're actually moving away from this concept of a standard, and that's for a couple reasons. Now, I know I was just saying, like, yes, that we're all doing them differently. The existing literature out there is too broad, but there is actually a lot of value and flexibility. Essentially, if we take like lifetime mileage for an example. So our team at Rivian, we're working really hard to ensure that we are engineering vehicles to last as long as possible. So when I write a carbon footprint report, I want to be able to capture those sustainability initiatives and celebrate that. And a standard, if we were to say, hey, you have to pick this number, kind of undermines that. Like, it doesn't let you call out what's most specific to your supply chain, and especially like if it's a sustainability initiative. So there's that. And there's also competing standards out there. There's a lot of, the automotive industry is global. And so there's a lot of different working groups out there that are trying to standardize this, some of which are coming in the form of international frameworks that you're going to have to respect. And so we didn't want to add to this competing landscape. And so that's why we've shifted from a standard to a disclosure addendum. So essentially, we don't want to tell people this is how you need to do it. We want people to say, tell us how you did it, disclose these key variables, and then also run these specific scenarios. Tell us what your vehicle looks like if it was driving in the US and lasting 200,000 miles, things like that, if that makes sense.
The disclosure amendment, smart. I think it's smart, but you and I don't work on 7-year product development cycles. We work on real-time data information. I'm assuming some of the individuals involved with this task force are used to the 7-year build cycles. How did you come to consensus where you said, okay, we're going to do something completely different. And oh, by the way, it's going to move a lot faster and it's going to work really good. Trust us. How did you come to consensus?
This might be kind of a cop-out, but it was pretty easy. People seemed really excited about it because one of the first things when we had initially approached this, we came at it more with the mindset of let's make a standard. And people were like, okay, I want to be involved because I don't want them to do it how I don't want to do it, So there was a lot of, well, are you paying attention to what's happening in Europe? Are you paying, And so there was all this pushback and this nervousness about like, oh no, another standard. So when we pivoted and proposed this idea of a disclosure addendum, I don't want to say it was unanimous, but it was almost like it was kind of unanimous. People were like, wait, this sounds cool. So we're still early in the process, but so far, knock on wood, it's been going okay.
In the disclosure, is there? I know I'm getting in the weeds with you, but now I have the curiosity hat on. Is there certain ways that it has to be formatted, certain disclosures that have to be made, certain sources of data? Is it a data set that comes along with it? Is it what goes into that?
Yeah, so we are building the worksheet. So we're building a technical report that explains why and how to fill it out. And then we're building a worksheet that says, what did you choose for this? What did you choose for this? And I think importantly, we have this section entirely dedicated to the scope of your LCA, where we have a checkbox of, did you include service? Did you include this? And so there's this power of the spotlight where practitioners, they can do it how they want, but they have to go through and check, no, I didn't include that. Which hopefully that spotlight then, pressures people to do better LCAs and do those things. But it's not a mandate. It's a tell us how you did it, if that makes sense. So it'll be like a worksheet, essentially.
But here's the kicker. What you said, you used the word spotlight. I'll use the A word, accountability. Because now there's a paper trail to go along with this.
I mean, yeah, that is the goal. Because at the end of the day, life cycle assessment, it really should be around so that we are making better sustainability decisions. It helps you identify your hotspots and opportunities to make your products better. And so if you are running an LCA and you're not including things like service, I mean, that's a sign that, to me, hey, are you not looking enough at how you can decarbonize that portion of your life cycle? The saying goes, what is it? You can't fix what you can't measure. And so that is this sort of, we want to push the industry. And I think by putting the really important variables just in a simple, right in your face addendum, a simple worksheet, it really does drive accountability.
So on the service, how do you decarb that? What goes into that?
Building your products to be more durable, designing for repairability rather than replacement. I mean, there's a whole lot of things that could go into it depending on what item we're servicing, using a cleaner materials to begin with. So when you do service it, it's a lower replacement.
So as part of your work, you're really focused on the carbon footprint part of the LCA. Is that going back to your passion of the outdoors? You're like, listen, I want to be able to go to Tahoe when it's blue. I don't want to go in there when it's sludge. Is that where that passion comes from?
I mean, yeah, at the end of the day, for me, I'd say biggest passion is combating the impacts of climate change. And so carbon footprint is your metric for climate change. Carbon is one of the best measured impacts out there. There's the data coming out of the IPCC it's decades long. It's a really robust set of studies. And I think there's a huge opportunity for all of us to be doing that better. But I mean, like we talked about before, there's a whole bunch of other environmental impacts that we need to be considering as well.
A lot goes into, if you want to call it the overarching, let's call it the overarching LCA, everything from material extraction to vehicle dismantling. A lot of complexities in there. What is the most difficult part of the life cycle to get reliable data? And the most important part of that, how do you see that changing in the future?
That's a tricky one. It probably varies OEM to OEM, but honestly, each stage of the life cycle has its own set of challenges. Your bill of materials for a vehicle is going to be 10 to hundreds of thousands of lines long. And so that's just a lot of data to churn through and make sure it's correct and track your recycled content within that. I mean, it's just, there's a lot of room for error. But, depending on what internal systems you have, to me, it's probably harder and easier for some. Your use phase, so the actual driving of the car, you have hundreds of thousands of customers all using the vehicles differently, all driving them in different locations. Are you using real world data? Or are you trying to actually use telemetry to understand a net average of all your vehicles? Or are you leveraging EPA or WLTP efficiency data? There's so many areas for different decisions, and I guess different sources of error for sure. But yeah, that's a bit of a cop-out that all the stages can be tricky. They all have their own challenges.
And then if you look at challenges, data can be manipulated. It can be used. You can pretty much fit data to fit a narrative. You can spin it and make it fit a narrative. And how big of a problem is that today? Because you don't see it as much as you did 4 years ago, but I'm assuming it's still a big problem out there.
I mean, yeah, it definitely can be an issue. And like you said, you can spin data to tell the narrative you want. And that's part of the point of this disclosure, is that it kind of shines a spotlight on some of those decisions. So I'll bring up an example without calling out the name, but there was an OEM that just had these really aggressive renewable claims that weren't that well founded. And so if you looked at just the final figure for the carbon footprint, it was super low. It was one of the best out there. And it was well, why? And then when you dug into it, you're like, oh, because they assumed almost the entire driving was all done on solar. And it wasn't a very well-founded claim. And so by filling out this disclosure, you have to specifically call out, this was the grid factor I used to represent charging. Grid factor being your massive greenhouse gas emissions per kilowatt hour of electricity. And so it helps spotlight some of those particularly powerful levers that could be abused.
Because you're given the spotlight, you're given the accountability, and then the next piece of that is you're forcing transparency where you can't hide in the shadows. Spies lurk in the shadows, but sustainability is not going to lurk in the shadows. So you have, let's call it a global OEM. They publish, say, several reports. They're out there. They're publicly available in the market. You can read them. I can read them. Our audience can read them. Do you see some of these OEMs going and putting the disclosure addendum to reports that are out there, or how do you see those being updated? They can say, oh, no, that was the past. And then, because you're going to get I asked because you're going to get somebody that's going to compare and contrast. Whoa! Now you have disclosures. There's a big difference over here.
Yeah, that's a tricky one. I mean, ideally, you're using it if it is transparent and it is accurately reflecting what you did and you are running the scenarios, then I think it's a valuable place where you can actually have meaningful discussions as they pertain to comparisons.
You have to have discussions, and I mean, debate's great. Having a conversation is great. You can learn something. If you're not interested in it, you pick up a book and you read, or you talk to somebody. There's a proposal coming, which I want to get your opinion on. There's a proposal to limit life cycle assessments that are ISO compliant and use the characterization factors from the latest assessment report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Why is this important? And what is the cutoff approach that was mentioned in the documents?
So I know I was saying we strongly advocate for methodological flexibility, but we do have to set like a minimum floor of scientific credibility. So the goal of this disclosure addendums is to fix inconsistencies, not allow for outdated or completely non-standard climate data. So touching on that first one, ISO compliant, and I don't actually think we talked about this earlier, but essentially the ISO standards are everyone more or less is following them to do their LCA reports, and they're great, but they're super flexible. They allow for, I mean, you would use the same ISO standard to do an LCA on a water bottle as you would an airplane. So you can imagine there's not a whole bunch of specific automotive requirements. But I think they're they're a minimum bar. It's like if you're not doing the ISO standard, specifically the 1440 and 44 series, it's not necessarily a good starting point for credibility. As for characterization factors, so these coming out of the IPCC or Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, these are I'm going to get really in the weeds here, but these are the scientific conversion factors that take greenhouse gases like methane or nitrous oxide and turn them into a single carbon dioxide equivalent number. So this is happening behind the scenes, but we all need to be using the same IPCC factors to ensure that we're speaking the same climate language, if that makes sense. And then that cutoff approach, this has to do with your system boundary of your LCA study. So the cutoff approach is, it's actually still being debated in the task force. I am a proponent for everyone needs to be using the cutoff, but we'll see if that wins out. But to me, I think it's really important that we all use that. Again, just coming back to, we need some basis for similarity. Like I'm all for a little bit of flexibility to most accurately reflect your supply chain. But if we're not using the same allocation methods, it starts getting pretty messy in there. And so cutoff essentially just has to do with where you're ending your system boundary. So are you accounting for the burden of recycling on the outgoing side or the incoming side? But yeah, I guess by requiring a few of these practices, we can just ensure that there's some scientific credibility going into these. Does that make sense?
It does. You said something which really stood to me was super interesting. You said climate language. How is, outside of the task force, let's call it the industry, is there a movement of individuals saying, okay, we all got to get on the same page as it relates to terms. We got to speak the same language. You can't go say biddity boppity and I say biddity boppity boop, and they mean two different things, even though they mean the same thing. Is that starting to happen now? Because when you get into the scientific aspects, it can be interpreted differently. It can mean different things. Is the industry trying to come together to coalesce around, if you want to call it, a common language?
You know, I actually don't hear this that much in the automotive industry. For the most part, every LCA I've looked at is using the latest characterization factors out of the IPCC, and we're following the ISO standards. So I haven't seen it as a big issue. I will say at other generic LCA conferences that I attend, so now we're getting cross-industry, there is discussions of people who would like to see us using maybe a different time frame for our characterization factors. Time frame being right now the most common is your GWP 100 years. So it's the impact of these gases over 100 years. Some people want to do the 20-year one, which shows more of your immediate impacts as they pertain to climate change. That's getting super technical. So I'm nervous I'll lose everybody with that topic. It just might be a little boring, but But there is some discussion in the broader industry. But honestly, the automotive is pretty well aligned in that space.
You mentioned earlier about the grid. You can't go a day about hearing energy, and we're all hearing it because of the data centers and the AI growth. And I saw a company at CNBC raised $1 billion to build a virtual grid today. I thought that was kind of interesting. But and the committee has pointed out that the choice of carbon factor for the electric grid, it's a major influence on the total footprint. Yes, we see that. Certain parts of the utilities in the country have solar, some have wind, some have renewables, and some have nat gas. So it's all over the map here in the United States. The change summary says that grid factors require further discussion. So what makes defining the standardization of grid factors for different regions? How are you going to do it? Obviously, it's massively complex, but how is the committee going to work towards that?
Yeah. So again, I think it'll be this two-parter of respecting people's methodological flexibility so that you can apply the grid factor that most accurately reflects your supply chain. So like for Rivian in our carbon footprint reports, we don't take a regional average of the United States as our main figure. We look at where our vehicles are being driven, and so we do like a very specific normalization to understand a kind of a more accurate grid. And I want to be able to keep doing that. But what the committee is going to align on is then adding in some generic scenarios to say, okay, great, that reflects your supply chain, your renewable contracts, where your drivers are driving. But how does it look if in this generic scenario, if you had vehicles just using the average USA grid factor, for example? And so that's what the committee is trying to align on is what are these scenarios and how many, if any, are we going to require people who fill out the disclosure to complete, if that makes sense.
Another thing that you're trying to align on, which I thought this was really interesting, remote start and preconditioning and the operational footprint. To me, it seems minor, but it seems like it's part of a larger debate to what goes into operational use.
Yeah. Right now, what we've been talking about in the committee is just honestly trying to make it as broad as possible. Like we're not trying to be restrictive on what is operational use, but I think I was already talking about those scope elements, but the more that we can include in that section, the more we can just make sure people are doing as comprehensive LCAs as possible. So for example, someone in the last meeting actually just suggested, why don't we add an other box so people can write in? So that way, when there's new aspects of the footprint that we don't even think of right now, they can write those in and then start showing that as an example and really, again, push each other to be as comprehensive at these LCAs as possible.
Because the committee is obviously trying to get as much data. And then there's the amendment that would require reporting on both electricity and liquid fuel consumption.
Okay.
How does that go into the carbon footprint? And does it complicate it?
Yeah, you're talking about for plug-in hybrid electrics?
Yes.
Yeah, they're trickier. It definitely is more complicated because you're essentially modeling two use phases. One that's kind of reflective of like a EV and one that's reflective of an ICE vehicle. And so what we want people to be reporting is that utility factor, which is essentially the ratio between how much your driving is happening in electric versus in combustion. And it's really important because electric driving is much cleaner than combustion. And so a driver that's spending 80% of their time on gas is going to have a much higher carbon footprint than the same vehicle driver spending 20% of their time on gas because, they're maybe charging at home and doing shorter distances. And so understanding what folks are modeling and assuming in that space is going to be really important.
The task force is doing a lot of good work, and at some point it's going to get published. When are you expecting J3341 to be published, and what's the adoption process? Will it be voluntarily, and are there incentives for a company like to Rivian to adopt it, or what's that going to look like?
So the first part of your question, I think we predicted 12 to 24 months. We're making good progress. We've only had 3 or 4 task force meetings thus far, and then a lot of offline communication. But I'm hoping we stick onto that timeline. Our stronger language, we will stick to that timeline. Hopefully even closer to the 12 months, but we'll see. It's a lot of different people in the room that we all need to agree. As for the adoption process, that's a good question. I'm still learning. This is my first SAE task force. So honestly, you might know better than I do, but I think that standard SAE models that these documents are voluntary. and like, not a binding regulation. Who's to say that later down the line, maybe it influences other governmental bodies to make this more of a requirement, but not sure on that front. But to me, I think the incentive to like immediately adopt this, at least for like companies like Rivian, is that it signals transparency and credibility if you're going through the process of filling it out. And so I'm hoping, especially since we have so many OEMs represented in the task force, that they feel the same way.
Consumers want transparency in the day. And if the consumer demands it and says, well, I'm not going to buy a vehicle if I don't give transparency, that's a very big incentive to adopt it very quickly. If you look at Rivian, since the early days when RJ founded the company, it's been focused on sustainability. All the messaging has been focused on outdoors. And I view Rivian more as a lifestyle brand than a car company, because that's just the way that, in my opinion, the messaging has resonated in the market. How do you see product sustainability shaping Rivian's long-term strategy?
I mean, for an automotive company, your products really are the bulk of your impact. So product sustainability strategies are going to be your primary lever in any long-term sustainability strategy. So I'd say it's all one and the same. At Rivian, we're really lucky. Our team, product sustainability, is embedded right into the engineering and design organization. So we actually sit within our attributes team, which defines features, performance criteria, and characteristics of the vehicle. And this means that like we shape our product from the beginning, what we call concept definition, all the way through the development cycle. And our engagement, like luckily, it doesn't even stop there. Like it continues all the way through the end of life, working with, circularity planning and customer engagement and bringing sustainability related features to the owners. So this influence over the use phase as well. So I guess like zooming out, as far as strategy, this life cycle approach really is that key shaping factor. Like we aren't just focused on as much recycled materials on the inside, or just decarbonizing the energy, or just planning for end of life recycling. It's like all of it at the same time. And I think because we're so deeply entwined in this engineering and design world, we're constantly balancing sustainability trade-offs. I always like to say, your most sustainable design is the one that actually makes it onto the vehicle. Kind of this concept of making sustainability sustainable. And so the results end up being features that aren't just good for the planet, but good for the business, good for our customers.
And that's good business. Putting this all together, Laurel, in your opinion, what is the future of life cycle assessments?
When I attend these LCA conferences, not necessarily automotive specific, but just LCA in general, I feel like there's this natural tendency to pursue this North Star, which is this insanely elevated level of accuracy using like 100% perfect primary data. But to me, like that focus loses sight of the big picture and like the true strengths of lifecycle assessment as a tool, which is identifying the direction and magnitude of your sustainability improvements. And so that's why, to me, and this is probably a controversial opinion, but I don't think LCAs need to become 100% more accurate. I think we need more breadth, less depth, like more scalable LCAs, so that everyone is doing it to make better products. So to me, the future is hopefully enabling better adoption. And I think we're already seeing that play out with lots of new technologies every day, whether it's digital LCA platforms or AI tools that are automating some of those complex part of the process, like the bill of materials, like we were talking about earlier. And hopefully it's just making LCA faster and more accessible so that we can really I want to be talking about how we use our LCA more than how we do them. And right now we're still stuck in this. How do we do them? And so hopefully that, to me, is the future, is how do we use them?
Yeah, because if you can, in the industry or everybody involved in this can build LCAs that are scalable, then they're highly likely more to become adoptable, especially as technology changes and you can produce things faster. We're seeing what's happening in Gen AI, and there's a lot of things that are changing, but at the end of the day, it comes down to scalability. This has been a really insightful conversation, also. Thank you very much. As we look to wrap up this conversation, what would you like our listeners to take away with them today?
Thank you so much for having me. A message to our listeners. I think sometimes it feels like this effort, standardizing automotive lifecycle assessments, is trivial. especially given the current headwinds in the sustainability world. But at its roots, we're talking about bringing an industry together to align on how we measure and ultimately improve our products. So transportation in the United States, it's almost a third of all greenhouse gas emissions. And so any small improvement in this space is really important, even just on a global scale. So I guess that keeps me hopeful and motivated in this space. Maybe this is a message to myself, honestly. But I guess to our listeners, please keep up with the work that's happening on J3341. Also, a shout out to Rivian. We just published our latest carbon footprint report, so check those out. But thank you again.
Check out Rivian's report. It'll be really insightful. I'll summarize this way. Little steps lead to big steps. Big steps lead to change. Today is tomorrow. Tomorrow is today. The future is J3341. Laurel, thank you so much for coming on SAE Tomorrow Today.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to SAE Tomorrow Today. If you've enjoyed this episode and would like to hear more, please kindly rate, review, and let us know what topics you'd like for us to explore next. Be sure to join us next week as we dig into the future of hydrogen in aviation.
SAE International makes no representations as to the accuracy of the information presented in this podcast. The information and opinions are for general information only. SAE International does not endorse, approve, recommend, or certify any information, product, process, service, or organization presented or mentioned in this podcast.